Hello, welcome back. I'm Dr. Robin Kelly, a GP who's concerned about the rollout of 5G, but also our cumulative exposure to radio frequencies over the last 20 years or so. And I stress that those two need to go together, because I think our concerns are just as much for what we've been exposed to over the years as to the rollout of 5G, which is also a major concern, are going to compound the issue. And also to stress that this is a concern from scientists and physicians like myself, not just for us, but for our children and future generations, those without a voice. And so it's very distressing for us to see the propaganda being propagated in our press without balance and without critical thinking in many ways. And it was apparent to me that there were parallels between how the telecommunication companies are conducting themselves and how the tobacco companies were conducting themselves over 30 years ago. I have a paper here written in 2001, but it actually reports from the tobacco companies in the late 80s, who were responding to the science, which was showing that passive smoking was dangerous. Now, prior to that, the tobacco companies had taken the stance that, well, they had agreed that smoking was dangerous to health, but their argument was that it was an act of free will from the smoker. It was almost like a human right, and that's their argument. Of course, initially they denied all ill effects, but they had to accept that there were ill effects. So it was a big blow to the tobacco industry, and one that they were very concerned about how it would affect their profits, and they were quite right. It had a major effect, particularly when it was the science was coming through loud and clear that second-hand smoke, or in what they call environmental tobacco smoke, was a carcinogen. So it's no wonder that we have a very similar situation now with our telecommunication company, with the evidence that I've been talking about in my last few videos, that from the results of the National Toxicology Program in the US, it would seem more than likely that the status of non-ionizing radiation is going to be elevated from class 2B into somewhere in the ones, if you like, for carcinogenesis or cancer causing. And this is a massive problem for the communication industry. So I've got really two papers. One a scientific paper written in 2001, illustrating the tactics of the tobacco industry in their efforts at discrediting scientific knowledge of environmental tobacco smoke. And this was a review of the internal industry documents which they've been able to lay their hands on. Many sort of millions of pages, I think, from this. The long and short of it is really that the tobacco companies saw this as such a major threat as they cast aside their individual differences and formed an organisation basically to focus on trying to create another narrative, a scientific narrative that disputed the narrative that was coming through from the true independent scientists. So they formed basically an organisation for this to happen. And the conclusions of this paper, which is pretty well documented and uses a lot of excerpts, was that the industry documents illustrate a deliberate strategy to use scientific consultants to discredit the science on environmental tobacco smoke. And the key points were tobacco industry used scientists, lawyers, independent organisations and symposiums, independent inverted commas, to discredit scientific knowledge of this environmental tobacco smoke, secondhand smoke, and that they build up a network of scientists sympathetic to their position, that there was no health effects. Of course, they failed. Now, I find it very interesting because reading a recent article in our New Zealand Herald, obviously this is just a newspaper article, entitled "Telcos Urge Government to Combat 5G Scaremongering and Chorus insists it's on board." They're doing the same thing. They're obviously combining because they're so concerned about this. But of course what they're saying, we've heard it all before, and I have to say it's fairly upsetting because they have a picture of what they call their opposition, which is a load of young folk with tinfoil hats. They talk about anybody who is concerned for health and safety reasons about exposure to this radiation as being false and alarmist, rumour mongering, misinformation, and they say they're similar to the campaigns such as anti-vaccination and anti-fluoride in water. Basically, this is a list of industry spokespeople, and although it's about the health, there's no quotation from anybody associated with health or even the biological sciences. So actually they're behind, very much behind, the tactics of the tobacco industry. It's very sort of immature as far as that's concerned, and I suspect they can't find really many credible sources to work with them. Here we're saying that the spokesperson for Spark saying that despite decades of research into the safety of cell sites and the government's advisory, we're seeing local communities oppose new site builds on the basis that 5G is unproven, will kill trees, animals and bees and worse. Well, there is evidence for that, but there's also a lot of evidence that we know there are no studies to show that it's safe. And Chorus have joined in the chorus, even though Chorus, of course, lay cables. But they see that it's more important to form a forum, just like the tobacco industries did. So, because foolish theories hurt the whole industry. And so they call it all those people who are concerned about health and safety are foolish. And of course they're lobbying the government with this propaganda. And along the way we've got Dr. Michelle Dickinson, who is presently, I think, on a tour sponsored by Vodafone, repeating the falsity that somehow non-ionizing radiation does not have enough energy to damage our DNA and cause cancer, which she now knows is basically untrue. And also she says that, emphasizes that the higher frequencies used by 5G are safer than 4G, having told us everything is safe with 4G. She's saying this is safer. There's not a lot of critical thinking. So these guys have banded together, but really don't seem to be as sophisticated as the tobacco industry, and I think they're getting fairly desperate because all they're doing is calling their opposition names which no longer work. So there you are. I wouldn't be too distressed by what they're doing, as they seem to be on the back foot. But obviously we will have to keep battling and being very concerned about this propaganda. Right, cheerio, bye-bye.